So what is envy? Envy actually is more of a expression of how we feel about ourselves rather than how we're perceiving someone else. It's actually so much more about how comfortable we feel with who we are, how confident we feel with who we are, how much self-esteem we have, how much self-assurance we have. Envy is more a root of that than it is of the fact that someone else is doing well. It's less about the fact that someone out there is amazing, making waves, doing something that you want to be doing. It's more about how we feel about ourselves, and it's experienced in that way of looking at someone else and reflecting back on us. Social circles, family circles, someone else has done amazingly in their exams, someone just landed a new job, someone else just got promoted, and everyone's looking at you going, what are you doing? Right? What have you achieved? Where are you today? Where have you got? Right? What's happening with you? Tell us about you. And you're thinking, you're going through all your head, you're trying to come up with all the things that you've thought about, all the things that you've achieved, all the things that you've done, and you're trying to bring it up like constantly. But you're struggling, you find it hard because you're now measuring your growth based on someone else's. You're now measuring your success based on someone else's. And that is the biggest challenge with envy. That one of the biggest challenges it brings in our life is that it forces us to start measuring our success in comparison to someone else's. That is the biggest challenge with envy. When we start comparing the level of our success with someone else's, you're already on the wrong foot, right? There's no two of us are the same. We all have a uniqueness that we can use to enhance the world. And when we dilute that and allow ourselves to compare us to someone else that we may not even be like, that we may not even share the same skills with, we really limit our ability to actually create success. We actually limit our ability to see how we can grow. So I always want you to remember that. I always want you to think about that. Now, the amazing thing I was looking at recently is obviously bionic limbs has become this thing of 2016 where we're able to allow people who've lost their arms, lost their legs, etc. to have these great robotic arms and legs again. Now, I've seen some stories about some phenomenal Paralympians. I've seen some phenomenal stories about human beings who without arms and legs have achieved extraordinary feats. And this blows my mind because I always think some of us have challenges in different areas, but imagine being born without legs or arms or, actually not having stuff that we all take for granted. But those are for some people, that would be an absolute dream to have that. Now through robotics and bionic limbs, they can have that. But for years they've lived without it, but I've seen positivity in them. I've seen drive in them. I've seen a desire in them to achieve something phenomenal. So it's amazing what's happening out there. And we really have to connect with those stories rather than living in our small bubble. And often because we only live in our small bubble, we talk to the same people. Right? One of the biggest challenges with envy is that we talk to the same people and they talk to each other. So our group is so small that we only hear the same stuff and we kind of start living as if that bubble of life is real. My dream is that if we were able to completely eliminate and obliterate envy from the world, our relationships would be revolutionized, love would be more apparent, we wouldn't have to second guess everyone, trust would be on another scale. Can you imagine? Actually, tell me what you think. Imagine what a world without envy would look like. Just write in the comment section, just imagine, what do you think would be solved if we removed envy from our hearts, from our consciousness, from our minds? Just for a second, imagine what the world would be like. One of the biggest challenges with envy, or what can really help us overcome envy, is that we talk to certain people and they talk to each other. So we create a bubble of life that we see as a reality. So mainly it's those people talking to each other, us talking to them, and that defines what we feel is success. So if you're around people who are doing well in their career, that's now your measure of success. If you're around people who are trying to do something different, that will be your measure of success. So we're actually creating bubbles of reality that are almost illusion-like, somewhat inception-like. We're almost creating a dream within a dream within a dream, and you get so lost in that definition of success that you forget a broader, higher perspective definition of success. Does that resonate? Does that make sense? That often what happens is that we're so in our closed groups, we don't open up to what's actually happening outside in the world. So I'm talking about these people with robotic arms and legs, bionic arms and legs, people Paralympians who are proving phenomenal things without even having limbs. Can you imagine that? It's an amazing achievement. Definitely take a look at it. And it makes us immediately feel more grateful for what we have. So the differentiation is that jealousy is more passive, envy is more active. So jealousy makes us think, oh, that person has something. Oh, that person has something. I wish I had it, right? That's jealousy. Envy is, that person has something, I want it, and I don't want them to have it. See, envy is a bit more active. You're like, I want it, I don't want them to have it, and actually I prefer it when they do worse. Jealousy is the beginning root seed of envy, right? So it starts with jealousy. We feel a bit jealous. We just feel a bit uncomfortable. We just feel a bit unnerved. We just feel a bit like, oh yeah, I wish I had that. That would be nice. It starts there and then it escalates, then it grows. So we've got to nip it in the bud. We've got to catch it at the point of jealousy. Envy teaches us more about ourselves than it does about the person. And that's why I want to track back to that. So you're working hard, but your friend takes a holiday, right? They're now posting status updates, selfies, knobbly knees, whatever it is that they're experiencing, and straight away we start to feel, oh, I wish that was me, I wish I could be there, right? And maybe you have a friend who's traveling, maybe you have a friend who has a great career, maybe a friend who you believe has a better body. Remember, these are all beliefs and perspectives, they're not necessarily reality. So the first piece of advice I want to give you, right, I'm going to dive into giving you some serious advice. Start with compassion, right? Just start with compassion. One of the worst things we can do to ourselves is judge ourselves. When we use critical judgment on ourselves, when we start looking down on ourselves, when we feel that we're bad people for feeling this way, we're only pushing away our inner voice and making it feel more quiet. We do that to ourselves all the time. When you judge yourself and you think, oh, I'm such a bad person for feeling like this, immediately you're stopping yourself from growth. Whenever you feel any thought in the mind, remember envy, jealousy, greed, anger. These aren't you, right? They are all figments, they are all aspects, they're all facets or behaviors of our mind. You're separate from your mind, right? Just as we're separate from these bodies, you're separate from your mind. You're pure consciousness, right? You like knowledge, you like wisdom, you like having other people achieve stuff. You like seeing success because we have that purity that's in there. But our mind is kind of like a shadow that overcasts all of that, and then we start believing we're our mind. When we start believing we're our mind, we start believing that we're bad, that we're greedy, that we're envious. The truth is we aren't. We aren't egotistic. We've just let that shadow become such a big part of our reality that we've adopted that as our personality. We've adopted that to how we feel. So the first thing I want you to believe is whenever you feel an emotion that you don't like about yourself, whether it's greed, anger, envy, ego, whatever it may be, first thing I want you to recognize is that it's like having a bad friend in your room that's really close to you. It's a friend who's going through some troubles, right? That's what it is. It's not you. It's like having someone else in the room who's having those experiences. And with that person, one of the things you want to do is start with compassion. If your friend was envious of someone else, you'd feel compassionate for them. You'd feel bad for them. You want to help them, right? Empathetic, not just sympathetic, but empathetic. Empathy and compassion is actionable, right? It's not just feeling bad for someone, it's actionable, it's wanting to do something. Negative self-judgment is the worst thing you can do. See, when we start to speak kindly to ourselves, when we do that, we're able also to extend that kindness to others. So you realize people are quite hard with themselves. People are quite tough on themselves. They also try and come down quite tough on other people. But the people who are able to talk to themselves kindly are also better at connecting other people kindly as well. The way to live your life in such a way that there's no cause for envy is that you've completely trained your mind to be under control of your intelligence and pure consciousness. You're actually able to guide it. Now, that will never be 100% foolproof plan, right? It will fall apart. And that's where the only way to do it is to be able to substitute or train the thoughts of the mind every time it goes off to feel envious. Hence, start with compassion, then lead with gratitude. When you become grateful for what you have, you won't become envious for other people's. I would put this quote out on social media for this session, that envy is the art of counting others' blessings and not your own. So when we're in that habit of gratitude, of counting our blessings, of focusing on what's really working for us, that is where we need to start. Anything can be positive when you engage it. So when you feel envy, you engage it by actually developing gratitude. So you're using your envy to actually create gratitude. But what we need to do is not use that as a strategy. That's not going to last long term. We just need to develop the habits of gratitude. So positive envy is when it forces you to recognize what you have rather than being fixated on what someone else has and seeing that as the ideal. Anytime you have a negative thought, that's the mind. Right? Anytime you have a negative thought, you have a thought that's taking you away from a higher principle of collaboration, connection, humanity. Anytime you have a thought of harming someone else, anytime you have a thought of revenge, making someone else look bad, any of those things, you know, it's that inner voice that tells you it, right? That's how you know the difference. Really, when you walk 1,000 miles in someone else's shoes, you realize that you don't envy them, right? Robin Roberts, she had this great quote. She said that if we all chucked our problems into the middle of a room or whatever it is, we'd all grab ours back, right? When you really look at the struggle and challenges that people have been through, it doesn't seem so attractive. So how can we find a solution to being envied? Really always be humble, always be grounded. If there's people that are envying you, always express yourself in the most servant leader format, right? Don't ever let it feel like reality. Be yourself, be humble, be grounded in that way. One of the things that envy forces us to do, and this is where we start getting into trouble, is that envy makes us feel that someone else has an ideal life or that that life is ideal. So what we start doing is copying that life. What we're already doing is that we're following a path that's not right for us. You're already taking a blueprint of someone else's life, saying that blueprint works for you and working on it. Many years down the line, you reflect and you think, why did I waste all that time? That wasn't right for me. So I said, start with compassion, lead with gratitude. And the third thing is focus on what will actually make you happy. Ask yourself, what actually would make me happy? Okay, that person's got a great holiday, but actually, that's not even my ideal holiday. And a lot of people end up spending that money, going on that holiday, and then not having fun, and then realizing that later. Let's focus in on what makes us happy. Let's focus in. Let's create that self-awareness to drive what is it that will make a difference in our life. It's more about you, right? You've got to take that reflection back onto you. And today the internet is almost an envy amplifier, right? But let's not blame it on the internet. Let's not blame it on the fact that people take selfies and that people post pictures of their holidays or that everything's a highlight reel. The root is still there. That we all have that feeling that we're not living the lives we want. See, when you create the life you want, it removes envy. Notice how all these topics we've been talking about this week are all interconnected. Simon Sinek talked about find your purpose. When you find your purpose and you live it, you'll be happy. E talks about the importance of gratitude. Yesterday I talked the importance of struggle and observing other people's journeys. Today we're talking about envy. You connect all the dots there. They're all interconnected, right? It all works together. I want to introduce you to what are the 3 responses. This actually applies to every experience in life, but we're going to apply it to envy. When you feel envy, when you feel jealousy, you've got 3 responses, 3 kind of wired responses in the way you behave. There are more, there's multifaceted layers, but let's start with 3. The lowest form is ignorance. You want to complain, you want to compare, you want to criticize. You want to wish like you have it. That's the lowest form of response. That's where we start. And that's okay. And therefore, the first point is just recognizing that that's where we start. A layer up from that, an improvement from that is, okay, that person's going out there and getting it. I'm not just going to mope about the fact that they've got stuff I want. I'm going to work and I'm going to show them. I'm going to compete with them. Right? I'm going to work as hard as they are and see how it gets. But you're still comparing. So you've given up the criticizing aspect. You've given up the fact that of your copying, but you're still complaining. You're still comparing. Higher than that is the fact that you say, actually, let me care about my needs. Let me praise that person and let me become conscious of what I actually need. Right? Let me not complain. Let me not compare. Let me not criticize, but let me become conscious, become self-aware of what direction is my life going into? What is it that I truly want to achieve? Where is it that I really want to go? Start creating self-awareness around those things. And naturally you start to remove envy. So you've got the ignorance layer From that, you've got the impulse layer, and the highest, you've got the insightful layer, right? So you've got ignorance, impulse, and insight. We want to be at insight. We want to move away from ignorance. We want to move away from impulse. You want to move higher and higher to higher consciousness, to insight. Imagine everyone in the world operated on the level of insight, right? That insight, that self-conscious awareness, self-care, compassion. You'd be oozing it out of yourself to absolutely everyone around you. Your ex is now doing absolutely great, and then you start thinking of all the memories, and that comes about. It all depends. That's a tough question, because it really depends on your relationship formerly and currently with your ex, because that has such a big play on how it's going to feel. One of the best things to remember there is recognizing that, again, it's the feeling that we're not quite complete, that we're not quite full, that we haven't quite raised our self-awareness. You got to recognize it's not really what's happening outside. It's so much more about what's happening inside. And that's where we need to start. We need to always go back to the root. I'm always talking to us about going back to the root of the challenge, the root of the issue, not the kind of special magic dust that can solve the externals, but actually going back to where it all starts. See, when you let go of the past, your past will let go of you, and that's harder to do. Like, it's easy to say, it's hard to do. The way to stop living in the past is start living in the now. So start making plans right now. Start making plans for the future. Start spending time with people who also don't get nostalgic. I remember at one point in my life, I kind of detached from a lot of people who spent a lot of time in the past. Now, they weren't negative people. They always talked about how things used to be great in the old days, nostalgia, that, oh, it felt so good a few years ago. That was the best years of my life. I started to disconnect from that, because I realized that I didn't want to be living feeling like the best years of my life were going to be at university and end there, that the best years of my life were as a teenager and end there. I always want every year to be the best year of my life, right? I never wanted to settle or limit myself for the feeling that the best years of my life have already passed. So sometimes it's not even negativity. It's just not allowing us to move forward. The interesting thing about this envy that we're talking about is that we feel so much envy about things that other people have that are good. We don't ever feel envious of things that other people have that are challenges. We don't really identify that. We rarely look at people and go, oh my God, I'm so lucky I don't have that, right? We're more like, I wish I had that. They're so lucky, I wish I had that. You never look at someone who you feel is worse off and feel, oh, I'm so lucky, I'm so blessed, I'm so grateful I'm not like that, and then try and help them. We rarely do that. So see, the mind, once trained, will actually start doing that. The mind will notice gratitude as opposed to amplifying envy. So we need to transform envy into gratitude by actually looking around us and thinking, wow, I'm actually quite lucky. Majority of us are richer than 90% of the planet. Now that sounds ridiculous when we're all struggling to pay bills and stuff. But in reality, there are people far, far worse off. And people say, well, I can't relate to that. Well, then go there and relate to that, right? I know one gentleman who I was speaking with, and he was telling me that when his kids were young, he took them to India to spend time with children who had to walk miles for water, who never had food. And he made them spend time with them, gave them food, gave them water, helped them serve these kids. And that really taught them the value of what they had today. It's so, so important that we train and teach children about compassion, and teach ourselves about compassion, teach adults as well. If we can't connect to the fact that there are other people struggling in much worse ways, then we will never really be able to overcome our envy. I read a great quote this morning, and it was saying that our minds are like tofu. It tastes or feels like whatever it's been marinated in, right? It just takes that energy, it takes that taste, it takes that flavor. Otherwise it's flavorless. Like the mind is a completely open sponge. It's just a sponge, and whatever you let it absorbs, right? Just like tofu. So anyone who likes food analogies, I hope you enjoyed that one. I saw it today. I thought it was quite funny. Statistics show that our top envy is around relationships, and the second one is around careers, and then the third one is around lifestyle. So it's obvious it's about relationships. Those are the things that bring the greatest joy in our lives. And that's why it's so important that we spend or waste so much energy focusing on the success of others that we don't spend enough energy focusing on developing our own success. Imagine all the energy you're channeling towards someone else's success and just going, how comes they have that? And you could channel that and say, actually, how do I create meaningful relationships in my life? How do I create relationships that I'm happy about? Just that switch completely changes the course of your life, right? Completely. That's all the switch that we need to make. And that's the switch where your intelligence leads the mind rather than the mind leading the intelligence. When the mind leads the intelligence, the mind gets caught in that web of the mentality that, oh, I don't have enough. I'm not good enough. And that's one of the interesting things, that there's no limits on the amount of holidays you can take. There's no limits on the amount of billionaires in the world. There's no limits on the amount of millionaires in the world. There's no limits on the amount of successful people in the world. There really isn't, right? There's nowhere where it says that there will only be 100 millionaires on this planet. There will only be 10 billionaires on this planet. There aren't rules like that. They're not written anywhere. But we tell ourselves there are. We make ourselves feel that there are. So we constantly put ourselves into this victim mindset where we feel, oh, but that doesn't happen to me. That doesn't work for me, right? That's not going to happen for me. So we need to remove that. And that's the mind leading. When the mind leads, it tells us there's a limit on success. There's a limit on this. There's a limit on that. If that person has it, I can't have it. Now, that's not true at all. If your friend just went on a nice holiday to Mauritius or Thailand or wherever it is in the world, that doesn't stop you. Okay, you can't have their seat on the plane that they've booked, given. But there's so many other seats, there's so many other flights. And we've got to start recognizing that. We've got to start connecting with that. And that's where we shift from the mind leading our dialogue to the intelligence leading our dialogue. The intelligence leads with insight. Let me be compassionate towards myself. Let me be conscious. Let me care. The mind leads with impulse or ignorance and takes us down the wrong route. Imagine you've got two friends. You're sitting with two friends, right? One is the mind, one is your intelligence. Your intelligence will be stronger based on what you read, what you absorb, that tofu soaked in your intelligence, what you're taking in every day, what you're thinking about. That's when your intelligence gets stronger. It's the one that you feed, right? The one that you feed. Are you feeding your mind or are you feeding your intelligence? Ask yourself that question right now, right? How many of you are feeding your intelligence on a daily basis versus your mind? The one you feed more gets stronger. Right? The one you feed more gets stronger. The one you feed with more intensity, more absorption gets stronger. Wayne Dyer said, when you squeeze an orange, what comes out? Orange juice. It's when you're squeezed, what it's already inside of you comes out. So social media is amplifying what's already inside. So we've got to go back to the root rather than saying, okay, let's stop using social media. Okay, you stopping social media will help you deal with the root, but the root is still there to be taken care of. Is envy healthy or useful? It's useful at the beginning when you use it to start something, but it's not good long-term. Envy long-term can lead to depression, self-esteem issues, relationship issues. It can push people away. That's one of the things we forget about envy. Envy's like holding a hot piece of coal and, you know, wanting to throw it at someone, but in that point you burn yourself as well. It happens to us all the time. You're actually causing pain to yourself. It's like drinking poison and hoping the other person will die. That's what envy is, right? It's that. And so you're paining yourself, and what we don't realize is that envy is causing us more pain than it is the other person, and we're pushing our relationship away as well. So if you want to destroy your relationships, envy is great. It's a great component. It's a great ingredient. But for those of us that want to enhance, improve our relationships, it's definitely not where we need to go. I really want you to think about how envy is the art of counting another's blessings, not your own. Start with compassion. Don't judge yourself. Don't criticize yourself. Don't compare yourself. Don't complain. Get rid of the 3 C's: comparing, complaining, and criticizing. Get rid of them out of your vocabulary. Get rid of them out of your mind. Just totally remove, right? Anytime you see yourself compare, complain, or criticize, stop doing it. Notice it. That's your mind. Your mind wants to compare. Your mind wants to complain. Your mind wants to criticize. Your intelligence wants to care. It wants to be compassionate. It wants to choose with confidence. It wants to be confident, right? Let's replace those feelings with that. Let's replace them for that. The next thing is really think about how you can increase gratitude in your life, right? When you become grateful for what you have, you'll receive more to be grateful for. It grows with trust. Realize that then you need to focus on yourself. Lead with gratitude, then focus on yourself. Increase self-awareness. Don't just copy. Don't just imitate what other people are doing. And remember, rise through the layers. Ignorance is let me complain, compare, and criticize. Impulse is let me compare, complain, and compete. And insight is just let me care, be compassionate, and choose to be confident and find out what really works for me. Hence, when we find our purpose, all these issues are solved. When we find our why, when we figure out why why we exist, when we figure out the use for ourselves in our lives and the lives of others, you automatically remove all these situations. And I really hope that we're all growing together, building an abundance mindset together. I look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks so much. Take care.